Hello, everyone. Before our next session, there's something slightly different happening at the table. For 1 week, we're putting the main campaign on pause. We're not leaving Aloxar, and nothing has gone wrong with the campaign. We're just taking a night away from our usual characters and heading somewhere else in the world for a completely standalone story, as one of our players, Brian, is unavailable at the normal time this week. And for this one, we're also going to have somebody new at the table. Our guest player for the evening is going to be Pete. I'm not going to introduce him properly here because I'd much rather let you meet him alongside everybody else when we go live. For this story, we're traveling to a part of Aloxar that we haven't really spent any meaningful time exploring. The Ashen Wastes. The wastes are an enormous scar across the landscape. They're dry, hostile, and largely barren, but calling them a desert doesn't quite explain what they are, because deserts are natural. The Ashen Wastes feel like something that happened. Very little grows there. What life does survive has adapted around the ash, the heat, and the strange conditions that dominate the region. And perhaps more importantly, the people living along its borders have spent generations making sure that the wastes remain exactly where they are. Because the people of Loxar don't believe that boundary is guaranteed. Our story is set in Ashenford. Ashenford sits right along that border. It's a settlement built with the knowledge that beyond it, the world changes. You have farmland, trade roads, greenery, and ordinary settlements on one side, and then gradually the landscape gives way to ash. So Ashenford has developed a very particular relationship with the wastes. It fears them. It depends upon them. It trades because of them. And its entire culture has grown around the belief that somebody has to stand at that boundary and keep watch. Which brings us to the day on which our story takes place. Once every 4 years, on the final day of the calendar, Ashenford holds a festival. And I want to be clear about something. This isn't a miserable town gathering where everybody stands around solemnly awaiting impending doom. It is an actual festival. People travel for it. Markets spill into the streets. Food is being cooked everywhere. Merchants arrive from neighboring settlements. Families who have moved away come home. There's music, drinking, games, performances. All of the usual excuses people have invented throughout history to get together and make an enormous amount of noise. For most people in Ashenford, it is the biggest event in their lives. But underneath all of that celebration is the reason the festival exists in the first place. At the center of Ashenford burns a ceremonial flame. It is lit at the beginning of the festival and burns throughout the day. At midnight, as the festival draws to its conclusion, a ritual is performed around that flame. It is an old ritual. Older than anybody currently living in Ashenford. Older possibly than anyone actually understands. But everybody knows what it does. Or at least everybody knows what they have been told it does. The ritual renews the protection around Ashenford. It maintains the boundary. It ensures that for another 4 years, the Ashen Wastes do not spread. And when the ritual is completed successfully, the flame at their center of town changes to blue. That blue flame is Ashenford's promise that everything is going to be all right. There's another few years, another few seasons, another generation kept safe at the least. And the people performing the ritual are not priests. They aren't great heroes. They aren't powerful wizards brought in from somewhere else. They are young people from Ashenford. 3 families have been entrusted with different parts of this tradition. And when the time comes for a new generation to take responsibility, 3 members of those families are chosen to perform the ritual together. Those are the characters we are following. They've grown up with this festival. They've watched previous generations perform the ceremony. They've spent their entire lives being taught that eventually the responsibility would become theirs. And this year, it has. Each of them has inherited the ritual in pieces. They have been given particular objects, they have been taught particular actions, and they have memorized particular words. None of them individually possesses the entire tradition. That matters. Ashenford's ritual was not designed to belong to one person. It requires all of them. And these aren't strangers being introduced 5 minutes before midnight. The characters have history with each other. They grew up together in this town. Some of that history you'll see established at the table through flashbacks and little improvised scenes between the players. Because one of the things I wanted to do with this one-shot is to explore what happens when people who already know one another are suddenly handed a responsibility that is much larger than any of them. They're old enough to inherit their family traditions. That doesn't necessarily mean they're old enough to be comfortable with them. And it definitely doesn't mean that they understand them, which is really where the story lives, because Ashenford is built on traditions that work. They've worked for generations. And when something has worked for that long, people tend to stop asking certain questions. Why do we do it this way? Why does the family perform this particular part? What do those words actually mean? Where did these traditions come from? If the tradition protects thousands of people, how much are you willing to accept in order to preserve it? That is about as far as I want to take you before the session begins, because this is still a mystery. And there are things about Ashenford's festival and about the ritual itself that I very deliberately do not want the audience to understand before the players do. What you do need to know is that the entire one-shot takes place across a single day. The festival begins in the morning, the ritual happens at midnight, and that clock is going to matter. So while Ashenford celebrates around them, our characters have one day before they are expected to stand in front of the entire town and carry out something that generations of their families have done before them. For everybody else, it is a festival. For these three, it is the day they inherit something. And exactly what they've inherited is going to be the question. This is also designed to be completely accessible as a standalone session. You don't need to remember 20 episodes of campaign lore. You don't need to know every faction in Alaxar. You don't need to understand what our normal party is currently doing. If you've never watched us before, this is actually a pretty easy place to jump in. There's new characters, a new location, a contained story, and a guest player joining the table for the night. So, that's where we're going. Ashenford, the final day of the year. A town celebrating beneath the shadow of the Ashen Wastes. 3 young people preparing to take their place in tradition older than any of them. A flame that must burn blue before midnight. And one long day before they have to find out exactly what that responsibility means. We'll meet Pete properly at the table, we'll meet the characters together as we make them, and then we'll see whether Ashenford gets another year. See you at the live stream, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, live on YouTube and Twitch still. Thank you.